0441 on the Yampolivka approach, first light bleeding over the Kreminna tree line. A T-72B3M rolls out of the pine break, then a second, then a third, a full reinforced tank company grinding onto the packed dirt road. Behind them, BMP-3 troop carriers hold spacing. Behind those, two Brem-1 recovery vehicles, the tell that Russia's 20th Guards Combined Arms Army was expecting to drag things home, not lose them in place. 82 minutes later, 19 of those hulls would be burning across 4 kilometers of road, 4 more abandoned, with hatches open. A $210,000 Bohdana shell, a $500 FPV, against a battalion tactical group's worth of Russian armor. This is how the Lyman salient is being paid for right now, and it isn't with adjectives. By minute 11 of this video, you'll see exactly how a $500 quadcopter walked through a T-72B3M's reactive armor block and cooked the autoloader. But first, the 6 days no one on the Russian side noticed, when Ukraine's 30th Separate Mechanized Brigade was already watching the assembly area and deciding which vehicle would burn first. The ground here matters. Yampolivka sits on the western edge of the Kreminna forest belt, on the shoulder of the Lyman salient, a wedge Ukraine reclaimed in October 2022, and has been holding under constant pressure since. Whoever owns the tree line between Kreminna and Torska owns the approach to Lyman itself, and whoever owns Lyman controls the northern hinge of the Donetsk operational line. Russia's 20th Guards Combined Arms Army has been ordered to break that hinge since spring. Institute for the Study of War Assessments through late June flagged a steady buildup of armor and thermobaric artillery in the Kreminna sector, the classic profile of a mechanized push being loaded, not rehearsed. Ukraine's 30th Separate Mechanized Brigade, Prince Kostiantyn Ostrozky, holds the western shoulder of that salient. They've been on this ground long enough to know which farm tracks flood after a summer rain and which do not. 6 days before the attack, the brigade's ISR layer went live over the assembly area. A Shark reconnaissance drone at altitude, orbiting quietly beyond the range of Russian short-range air defense. A Leleka-100 tucked closer, dipping in and out over specific vehicle parks. The Shark is a Ukrainian-built system, operating around 35 kilometers of standoff, with a stabilized optic that can hold a single vehicle in frame for hours. The Leleka is smaller, cheaper, faster to relocate. Together they don't just watch, they build a pattern. Which sheds warm up in the morning? Which tank commanders take the same walking route from the mess to their vehicles? Where the recovery vehicles are parked, and how far the fuel trucks are from the armor. Defense Express reported through early July that Ukrainian brigades in this sector have been receiving fused ISR products, feeds cross-cut with radio direction finding, and according to Militarnyi, with rear area agent reporting from occupied Kreminna. The picture that emerged wasn't a suspicion, it was a schedule. The trigger, when it came, was mundane. On the morning of July 3rd, before sunrise, Russian recovery vehicles moved into a forward logger position. That single decision told Ukrainian planners the assault was inside a 24-hour window. Recovery vehicles don't move forward for exercises. They move forward when someone upstairs expects to need them. By 03 o'clock on July 4th, the 30th Brigade's fire cell had a Bohdana 2 battery hot on the western bank of the Seversky Donets, an FPV strike company from the 60th UAV Battalion pre-positioned in tree cover along the Yampolivka-Torsky Road, and TM-62 anti-tank mine strips seated across 2 culverts the column would have to cross. Everything the Russians were trusting, the pre-dawn cover, the road's familiarity, the assumption that the tree line hadn't been walked in weeks, was already false. Here's the asymmetry that runs through this entire war and is now running through Lyman. A T-72B3M, in Russian internal cost accounting, is roughly a $3 million vehicle to modernize and field. A Brem-1 recovery vehicle is around $2 million, once you count the crane, the winch, and the crew training. The FPV drones that hit them cost, at Ukrainian volunteer workshop rates in mid-2026, somewhere between $400 and $600 each. A single 155mm shell from the Bohdana is more expensive at around $210,000, but it's doing work that used to require an airstrike or a battalion of towed guns. When those numbers sit next to each other, the arithmetic of Russian mechanized doctrine breaks. You cannot fight a war on the ground when the vehicles you need to close ground with cost 5,000 times more than the weapons erasing them. The wedge crossed the tree line at 0441. Two T-72B3Ms in the lead, spaced roughly 40 meters apart. Tighter than doctrine. A small tell that the crews were nervous about mines and wanted the lead tank close enough to see the second's tracks. That instinct is exactly what the 30th Brigade had bet on. The TM-62 strip at the first culvert triggered under the lead tank's right track. Not a catastrophic kill, just enough to immobilize the vehicle in the exact meter of road the second tank couldn't easily pass on either side. The column stopped. That was the point. In modern war, a stopped mechanized column is not a column anymore. It's a queue of coordinates. The FPV attack came in from the northern flank, 4 aircraft in the first wave. The 60th UAV Battalion has been running mixed thermobaric and shaped charge payloads on their strike FPVs since the winter, and the mix that morning was heavy on thermobaric. Because thermobaric ordnance doesn't need to defeat armor. It needs to find a hatch, a vision block, an open engine deck. The first 2 FPVs targeted the 3rd and 4th vehicles in the column, hitting the engine decks from a steep dive angle. The 3rd and 4th FPVs went for the BMP-3s trailing the tanks, and the BMP-3's autocannon can point in the direction of a threat, but cannot elevate fast enough to track a diving quadcopter descending at 45 degrees. The BMP crews knew this. It didn't help them. Now, the moment I promised, how a $500 quadcopter cooks a $3 million tank. A T-72B3M carries its main gun rounds in an autoloader carousel under the turret basket, wrapped around the crew like a belt of ammunition. The turret's reactive armor is designed to defeat shaped charges arriving from the flanks at roughly horizontal angles, the profile of an anti-tank guided missile. It is not designed to defeat a small explosively formed penetrator arriving from directly above, at a steep vertical angle, striking the thinner armor over the engine or the turret roof. The FPV pilot, watching through a first-person video feed with a latency of maybe 80 milliseconds, guides the drone into that vertical window. The warhead penetrates the roof. The carousel, sitting a meter below, catches fire. The tank's turret separates from the hull in the signature ring of fire detonation that OSINT analysts have geolocated hundreds of times on this battlefield. Total elapsed time from the drone leaving the tree line to the turret in the air, under 90 seconds. Cost of the drone, less than a mid-range smartphone. That is one tank. There were 19. The Bohdana battery opened up at 0503. The Bohdana 2 is a Ukrainian-designed 155mm self-propelled howitzer mounted on a Kraz or Tatra chassis, firing NATO-standard ammunition at ranges beyond 40 kilometers with precision-guided rounds. What matters here is not the maximum range, but the response time. From coordinates arriving at the battery to first round out of the tube, Ukrainian artillery officers speaking to the Kyiv Independent this spring cited timelines under 3 minutes in the best cases. That morning it was closer to 5, but the Russians were not moving. The first Bohdana rounds walked directly through the position of the 2 Brem-1 recovery vehicles at the rear of the column, which had been racing forward to hook the disabled lead tank and drag it clear. Both recovery vehicles were destroyed inside a 2-minute window. With them went any remaining chance of pulling the surviving armor back to Kreminna. Everything left on the road was going to burn on the road. Before we go further, you're watching Fury Military. We break down this war system by system, kill chain by kill chain, every week. If you want to understand how a modern brigade actually eats a Russian tank company, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Back to Yampolivka. Between 0515 and 0540, the engagement stopped being an ambush and became what Ukrainian officers openly call a kill zone. Additional FPV waves came in. Militarnyi's after-action geolocation, published 2 days later, matched at least 7 burning frames on the Yampolivka-Torske road to specific Google Earth reference points. The Russian company commander, according to intercepted radio traffic that the Astra telegram channel excerpted on July 5th, requested air support and was told none was available in the window. The Russian VKS has been visibly reluctant to fly close support missions inside 20 kilometers of the Ukrainian front line since Ukraine received additional Patriot and NASAMS coverage over the northern Donetsk operational area. Reluctant is a polite word. ISW's late June assessment was blunter. Russian rotary wing sorties in this sector have declined sharply, and fixed-wing glide bomb runs are being staged from further inside occupied territory, adding minutes to any response. At 0547, a final Vampire heavy bomber drone run confirmed the state of the column. The Vampire, sometimes called the Baba Yaga by Russian troops, is a Ukrainian heavy multi-rotor built to drop mortar-caliber munitions on entrenched or disabled vehicles from low altitude at night. In this case, it was daylight, and its job was less strike and more assessment, a slow, deliberate flight over the wreckage to confirm which vehicles were fully destroyed and which had crews still inside. The Vampires video, portions of which the 30th Brigade released in edited form on their official channels within 48 hours, showed 19 destroyed hulls and 4 abandoned vehicles with open hatches and no visible crew. 82 minutes, start to finish. Now the meta move that runs through every one of these engagements. The Russian Ministry of Defense readout, published that evening, described the operation as a successful reconnaissance in force in the Krasny-Lyman direction, with insignificant equipment losses due to enemy artillery. Insignificant. Hold that word next to what Russia's own information ecosystem was already publishing. Astra and Exilenova Plus, 2 Telegram channels run by Russian émigré journalists who have built their reputation on cross-referencing military obituaries and unit casualty lists, published inside 48 hours the names and units of at least 31 Russian personnel killed or wounded on the Yampolivka approach. The Moscow Times aggregated regional obituaries the following week and confirmed identities from at least 3 separate motor rifle formations subordinate to the 20th Guards CAA. The gap between insignificant and 31 confirmed dead from a single company action is the entire war in miniature. The official line and the reality are not just different. They are being published in the same 48-hour window by people who all technically live under the same government. You cannot call a battalion tactical group's worth of armor insignificant when your own soldiers' mothers are posting the funeral notices. These casualty counts, the destroyed vehicle totals, and the kill chain timing all originate overwhelmingly with Ukrainian brigade releases and Ukrainian-adjacent OSINT accounts. They should be treated as claims, not confirmed to the round. The direction, though, is not in serious dispute. Defense Express and Militarnyi geolocated 7 burning frames independently. The Kyiv Independent quoted the 30th Brigade's press officer with a hull count of 19. Astra's Russian side casualty list is public and citable, even if the true number is 15 destroyed tanks instead of 19, or 24 instead of 23 total vehicles. The strategic shape holds. A Russian tank company crossed a tree line. Under 2 hours later, it had ceased to exist as a maneuver unit. Here's the read that will earn some pushback in the comments, and I'll stand by it. A lot of commentary on this war treats engagements like Yampolivka as tactical outliers. Clever ambush, lucky day, one brigade got a big win. That is exactly wrong. Yampolivka is the average now. It is what happens when a reasonably well-equipped Ukrainian brigade with 6 days of intelligence buildup meets a reasonably well-equipped Russian tank company inside the effective radius of the modern Ukrainian sensor-to-shooter loop. The 30th Brigade is not a special unit. The 60th UAV Battalion is not the only FPV strike company on the line. There are 20-plus Ukrainian brigades holding sectors like this one, and behind each of them is a Bohdana battery or an equivalent, an FPV company, a Shark orbit, and a link to national ISR fusion. Russia's problem is not that they lost this specific company. Russia's problem is that this specific company is what an average bad morning now looks like for them. Push through the kill zone, or scatter and lose the assault before it starts? If you're the Russian battalion commander watching the lead tank go up on the first mine strip, which order do you give? Tell me below, and tell me why. There is no clean answer, and the fact that there isn't is exactly why the 20th Guards CAA has stopped being able to translate mass into ground. Zoom out to the strategic layer, which is where this story actually lives. The 20th Guards Combined Arms Army was, before February 2022, considered one of the more capable formations in Russia's Western Military District. It has been reconstituted at least twice, according to CCS analysis published in the spring. Pulled apart, refilled with mobilized personnel and refurbished vehicles from long-term storage, and pushed back into the line. The vehicles being refurbished at facilities like Uralvagonzavod and the storage yards outside Bugurislan are, by satellite imagery counts that both CSIS and the Atlantic Council have published, going out faster than they are coming back in. The pace of refurbishment matters more than the raw stockpile, because the stockpile numbers everyone quotes are counting hulls, not runnable tanks. Reuters reported this spring that Russian tank production, when you strip out refurbishment and count only genuinely new vehicles, is running at fewer than 300 a year. The 20th Guards CAA alone has consumed something in the range of that annual output over the past 9 months of combat on this axis, according to Ukrainian General Staff figures cross-referenced by ISW. This is what sensor-driven warfare looks like, and it is why mass alone no longer wins. You can keep pouring refurbished T-72s into an assembly area, you cannot keep them from being seen. And once they are seen, and once the kill chain that observes them is faster than the chain that commands them, mass becomes the target rather than the solution. That is the doctrinal reality the 20th Guards CAA is being ground against on the Lyman axis. Every T-72B3M pulled out of the Bugaruslan yards and shipped west is another vehicle that will spend, on average, weeks in a Russian rear area, then hours in a Russian forward assembly area, and then minutes on a Ukrainian road before it is a data point in an OSINT thread. There is a broader economic layer to this, worth naming because it explains why Russia cannot simply outproduce the problem. The Russian federal budget for 2026 allocates more than a third of federal spending to defense and national security, a figure the Moscow Times and Reuters have both broken down. That number is holding up an armored refurbishment program, a drone program, a missile program, an artillery shell program, and a personnel payment program simultaneously, all while oil and gas revenues are running below the 2022 baseline. The Russian government imposed a fuel export ban in the spring, according to Reuters, and as the pattern of these bans has taught us, a government that bans fuel exports to guarantee its own domestic supply is quietly confessing the shortage the official line denies. You cannot simultaneously insist your economy is fine and pull emergency levers only a stressed economy uses. Something has to give, and increasingly what is giving is the ability to replace a T-72B3M as fast as an FPV pilot destroys one. Which brings us back to the road outside Yampolivka. 19 hulls in 82 minutes is a tactical event. What it cost the 20th Guards CAA to replace those 19 hulls is a strategic event. What it does to the Lyman salient over the next 6 weeks is an operational event. All three are the same event, measured at different scales. That is why open-source analysts spend so much time on single engagements, because at this stage of the war, a single well-observed engagement is a legible slice of the whole system. Yampolivka is not the exception. It is the readable version of what is happening across the Kreminna, Bakhmut, and Pokrovsk axes every week, in numbers that are less well documented only because the OSINT community has finite capacity to geolocate every burning frame. Can a combined arms army that loses a tank company a week to a single sensor-driven brigade still be called an army in the way we used the word 10 years ago? Can Russia's refurbishment pipeline outrun a Ukrainian FPV workshop economy that is scaling faster than the storage yards can empty? And what happens on the Lyman axis in September, when the summer's assault windows close and the 20th Guards CAA is asked to account for what it spent to gain how many kilometers? Those are the questions that will decide the next phase of this war, and they are the ones this channel will be tracking as they answer themselves. If you found this useful, subscribe to Fury Military. We break down engagements like Yampolivka, systems like the Bohdana and the Shark, and the slow exposure of Russia's war machine, every week, in the same OSINT-grounded voice. The point of this analysis isn't to celebrate destruction, but to understand the military and human realities behind it. Because the clearer we see modern war, the clearer the value of deterrence, stability, and a just peace becomes.